Hello, everybody. I'm Gary Gomes, Vedic astrologer. Okay, now that our introductions are out of the way, I'd like to welcome you to my show. I've been a Vedic astrologer for the past 30 plus years. We're always learning, we're always improving our knowledge base, and we're always looking at recent events in the world. So I'm hoping to discuss um, not only what's happening in Ukraine and Russia today, but also broader combinations and broader aspects of the world that'll be coming up over the next few months. Just to give you my background, I've been, as I said, I've been an astrologer for 30 plus years. My interest in sciences like these goes back at least to my pre-college years. I was interested in astrology when I was a kid. When I was around 10 years old, I got introduced to Linda Goodman's Sun Sign book, and other things came up, and I was interested in tarot around 19, and other things came up. And then finally, when I decided to devote my energy to meditation around the age of 38, a lot of these doors opened again for me. So I started a serious study of astrology around 1990. Tarot came shortly after that, and numerology was also lurking in the background around my age of 21. So this is something that people are drawn to for reasons which are unclear to them. But usually you can see like pivotal events in your life, trying to make sense out of pivotal events in your life. And those were the types of things that were happening to me at that time. If I go back to those periods, I can look back at serious major planetary periods I was in or trances I was involved in that triggered that. But I was more of a rationalist than an astrologer until I hit my late 30s, and then I decided to essentially say, why the heck not? It seems right. Let's get it done. And so in that time, I've actually lectured extensively since 1994. 1996, I went into like regular lecturing. Around 2000, around a year later, I was put on the American Council of Vedic Astrology board. About a year after that, I'm sorry, about a couple of years after that, I was published in Mountain Astrologer. A couple of years after that, a few years after that, I was working on as both the vice president for the Council of Vedic Astrology and also working on the American College of Vedic Astrology, teaching online. And I actually started teaching around 1996. I actually had students as early as 1996. And let's see, went over to England in around 1999, Hawaii 1999, same year. And also studied with Cam Rowley and a variety of other astrologers, and worked on Vedic astrology articles and have been working on a book since 2020, which will finally this year see the light of day. So it's so I'm a slow worker, as you can tell. Um, but I think you'll find the book contains certain information you won't get from other astrologers. Not that the other astrologers are bad astrologers, but there are certain things I picked up through the years that are kind of interesting. Also, I like to encourage people to subscribe to the channel. Oh, wait. And by the way, while I was doing this, I was managing to work full time and also had a consulting business and also had went back and got my doctoral degree. So I've been kind of a busy guy. Um, uh, with lulls in between. Yeah. All right. So we can't keep on going 110 miles an hour all the time. Finally, and most recently, I was invited to talk in Turkey. I'd like to go back again. I'd like to continue traveling again, but circumstances have not made that viable for the past few years. But hopefully, within the next couple of years, that will become viable again. So, also I'm a Reiki master. I'm a Temple of Kriya Yoga priest, and a variety of other things I've learned through the years through association with different people. So it's a little bit of palmistry, a little bit of other stuff, and I have a strong belief in remedial measures. I just want to make so having given my background, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to the page, as I would like to monetize this page sooner rather than later. I think I have the hours necessary to monetize, but not the subscribers. So if you can subscribe or recommend to your friends to subscribe, I'd appreciate that. And we'll go from there. I am planning on developing a few new pages as time permits. So I should have a bit more time this summertime. And I am setting up a school, and I am setting up a variety of, I would say, pretty interesting things for you, the viewer. Okay, so, and I tend to veer towards informality. I don't script these things out, as you can probably tell by watching me closely enough. It's not really for lack of trying, but I find it's better when I improvise. I have a background, quote unquote, as a musician, and it's been as an improvising musician. So I find that ideas flow more readily to me. All right. On that note, I like to make what I would call an editorial comment, and just a little bit of encouragement to the audience out there. Basically, when we hear a bunch of bad news, or we hear, or we get engrossed in a bad cycle, and this usually happens when Saturn's very strong in a chart. Okay, and Saturn's been incredibly strong over the past couple of years. We tend to think very short term. We tend to think in what I would call apocalyptic terms rather than rational, let's figure ways out of this situation terms. So I'm worried that astrology, just in general, has hit one of those periods in which we're so mired in bad news that we can't see a way out of it. And there is a principle that says that if you expect bad news, you're going to get bad news. And I think that it's really up to individuals like astrologers to forecast honestly, but also to give some hope. So I, I'm so what I'd encourage you to do is we do have some really difficult planetary combinations lately. We do have some really difficult transits coming up, but the difficult transits also create the most opportunities for progress, for growth, for um, for new solutions. So if significations in a chart indicate catastrophe, do we have to accept that particular interpretation? Uh, it's my opinion that we don't. Um, Basically, you're going to have, we're in for a few disruptive years. That much is clear. Will it inevitably lead to a war? There's nothing inevitable about war. That's a human choice. There's nothing inevitable about um, there's a certain inevitability to economic downturns, but how we react to them and how we address them is our choice. And whether or not we do something about them before they get here is our choice. Okay, so again, there are a lot of negatives coming up. I just look back in my own chart to combinations to transits, which were similar to transits that are occurring right now, because they're um, essentially, even if you include the outer planets, there have been certain aspects or certain conjunctions that have occurred already within our lifetime that we're re-experiencing. And I think people are over-interpreting the bad indications. So I'm not Pollyannish. I'm not saying that nothing bad will happen, but I'm saying there are ways to avoid this and also ways to maximize opportunities from this for if you're smart and if you don't give up. I think that's the most important thing. So let's look at the chart. Let's see what's going on. And I'm going to share this again. Yeah, I've listened to, I'm going to say from a personal level, I've been bombarded with projections of gloom and doom. And nor and under normal circumstances, I'd probably be worried. But I'm going to re-share the screen again because I don't trust this to go properly the first time it's up. Just fix this, okay? So I've got two charts up. But had I not been around for a long time, so and I've seen world events happen that have caused problems for people. I've seen world events happen that have barely touched people. And I think it's important to keep in mind that, let's say, if we go back to the 1960s, Saturn was in the same signs it was now from like roughly 62 to 1968, 69, excuse me. Saturn was in the same signs it's in right now from roughly 1992 to 1998. 1998. We did have, the 60s were extraordinarily disruptive decade. A lot of people look back on the 60s and say, oh, it was all peace and love. when in actual fact it wasn't. There was a threat of nuclear war, as there appears to be now, especially with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and especially um, with the USSR. We were also mired in Vietnam. We were also facing a huge civil rights movement in the 1960s, and huge student protests, and what people were interpreting as the decay and decline of society, but society was going through a shift. So some people would say it did decay and decline. I would say it just shifted. It just moved a little bit in one direction. The 1990s, I can remember, for those of you who remember this individual, there was an individual named Gordon Michael Scallion, who's still alive apparently, who was predicting massive catastrophes for the Earth in the 1990s. And now we're back and we have a disease and we have a war. So essentially, these are transformative events in the world. They're not death sentences. They're not indicators of the inevitability of war. If you go back to the 1990s, Rahu and Ketu were pretty much 19. I'm sorry, in the 2000s, Rahu and Ketu were pretty much in the same position they are right now, and also back in the 1980s. And you had situations where there was fear, there was disease and fear of terrorist attacks in the 2000s. There was in the 1980s, there were fears of war with Russia. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is this isn't a new set of circumstances for us. A lot of these issues will repeat unless we learn to adjust and recognize them as issues that are serious but not insurmountable. That having been said, let's look at the chart. And I want to check the time. All right, so we're around 20 minutes in. So I do get really impatient when I see not impatient, that's perhaps the wrong word. I get really frustrated when people look and say, ooh, there's a war coming, or the astrology indicates this. The astrology doesn't force a war. The astrology doesn't force a disease. It's our own actions that present or complicate or cause these things to happen. It's not we get information. Let's put it this way: we get information from astrology or from a variety of other predictive mechanisms, and we can surrender to that information and say, "I give up; it's inevitable." Or we can look and say, "How can we change this around?" Okay. Otherwise, astrology is useless, to be quite honest with you, because you're getting a warning that you can't do anything about it. So you might as well just hang it up and just say, "That's it, I'm off." All right. So, and I'm not making fun of any of my fellow astrologers who are very serious and very dedicated individuals who are saying these things. But there is a tendency to develop tunnel vision. There is a tendency, I've seen it throughout my entire lifetime, to assume that things will keep on going the way they're going. So it's Newton's first law of motion. I think it's one of Newton's laws of motion. A body will move forward until and not stop until and unless there are intervening forces. which will slow it. So the assumption is there are no intervening forces, and there are always intervening forces. So let's go back here. Let's go back to this chart, and I'm going to close it and start up again. I hope it shares this time. I had a bad experience this morning with chart sharing, so that's why. So this is my second try today, and actually it's good because I was in earlier when I was talking with you, I had Rahu in the first house, so I was panicky. Now I have Moon in the first house, and now I'm more calm and communicative. Okay, so it helped. So again, the planets do affect our states of mind. Saturn and Capricorn usually, at least from what I've seen from charts, indicate big reckonings, big changes. And if we go back 30 years before the 1960s, we had, basically the Great Depression has settled in. 30 years before that, there was a large movement towards reform in government. So a lot of these things are predictable cycles, but there are other combinations which essentially can make them worse or better. Now, I'm going to start by telling you about something that's been going on in the chart. So I've spoken a lot about this Mars-Venus conjunction over the past few weeks, but it's important. And the two planets don't actually have opportunities to conjoin roughly or oppose roughly twice a year. This particular conjunction has been relatively long-lived because Venus and Mars, just because of their relative velocity, have been close to each other. Around March 13th, and Venus, and there is one school of thought that says that Venus always wins planetary war, and Mars can never beat it because Venus is so strong. I find that a little bit simple-minded, or I don't agree with it. I won't say it's simple-minded. I don't agree with it because Venus is essentially the most powerful planet in the chart, but I've seen too many charts with Venuses that have been overwhelmed by other planets. Plus, Venus itself is not necessarily a pacifist planet. And I've said this before, the incarnation of Vishnu through Venus, so they have 9 incarnations of Vishnu through each of the planets. And the incarnation of Venus through Vishnu is Parashurama, who's essentially Rama with a battle axe. So he's this very savage fellow who wipes out the warrior caste 3 times, at least around the world, in order to purify the warrior caste and make them less bloodthirsty. So a Venus-Mars conjunction, Venus winning planetary war, it doesn't necessarily command peace. It can command a purification of warriors or fighters and the opportunity to rebuild or to restart. So this is a very small combination. It's been causing a lot of trouble, and essentially it'll largely be over by tomorrow. Now, that doesn't mean that Mars and Venus won't affect each other. When I learned Western astrology, there's a 3-degree aspect in which planets still affect each other. So Venus isn't going to all of a sudden overwhelm Mars and bring peace into the world suddenly because it gets away from Mars, because it's a faster planet. It will, however, move away gradually and give some sign or some modicum of order or civility to the conflict. It may even cause some domestic problems or or for Putin, but also make his armies more efficient. So it may in fact grant victory to one or the other sides, although I don't really see that coming for about another year or so, or at least not the final resolution coming for about another year. But I'm hoping the brutality ends, the brutality that we're seeing in this war, where innocent people are being killed and attacked. The other thing is, and also I'm hoping, so that's an important combination. Venus leaves the sign roughly in about 20 days. So let's see where that'll put us. So it's April 1st. So let's see how close. And so you can see that Venus has gone into Aries. It's well outside the range of Mars influence. So that's a good thing. But the other thing we have to watch out for is, so I'm going to go back to the original date. And the other thing we have to watch out for is, sorry, folks. The other thing we have to watch out for is that by March 17th, Rahu will enter Aries and Ketu will enter Libra. These are big changes, okay? Whenever Rahu or Ketu go into cardinal signs, things happen. And as a matter of fact, they happen rather quickly, especially signs ruled by Mars. So you could see an escalation of the war. Somebody had gone online, and I can't remember the person's name, and I'm not meaning to criticize, and was saying, is it possible the chemical weapons could be used in Ukraine? Yeah, it's possible. I don't think Russia would do it for a variety of reasons. But it's possible. And actually, if you look at where Rahu will be on March 17th, March 18th, it will be in Aries. So the astrologer was using Mars and Uranus being together in Capricorn, or Mars and Uranus being in angles to each other, excuse me. And that's fine, but Rahu also rules poison gas. Rahu also rules poisons and chemicals and things like that. So it's sort of like adding a plate to a dinner that you already have. So it's like having 2 helpings of green beans on your dinner. If you love green beans, that's great. You can knock yourself out, but you don't necessarily need 2 helpings of that in order to say this is possible. So yes, that is very, very possible. I think because of the negative aspect of Rahu on Aquarius and the negative aspect of Ketu on Leo, I don't think that's going to happen. So, and I'll tell you why. Basically, this Jupiter in Aquarius is actually considered to be a really incredibly good placement. And within about oh my gosh, 3 days, the sun will move into Pisces. Jupiter will be out of combustion with the sun. That'll make it more likely that Putin and the Russians will scale back the terror of the attacks they've been doing. It'll also make it more likely that the Ukrainians will find themselves in a position in which they don't have a lot of leverage. So I'm thinking they're going to reach terms relatively soon. So maybe in early April. The question I have though, and again, this is entirely speculative, is if the European countries will, or the NATO countries will allow terms to be reached. And the reason I'm saying that is because the United States itself is in what's called a 7.5-year period of Saturn. People tend to do stupid things during 7.5-year periods of Saturn. And I'm just wondering if there'll be this kind of encouragement for the president of the Ukraine to stick it out. And the NATO powers will be encouraging that. If that happens, then we can expect this conflict to last until January of next year. And I think with the same outcome, but with a lot of damage to the world economy. And most likely that damage will happen. So most likely that damage will start to show up in April and go until June. And Saturn will move back into Capricorn in June. Saturn will move into Aquarius around late April through June. And or else you'll see some kind of a compromise reached. Russia will withdraw, will come back again in midsummertime to finish what it started. So I'm hoping that people make the right decisions, not only for the Ukraine, but for the world. And I'm including Putin in this assessment because Putin, at least from looking at Putin's chart, he has this K2 in this first house. And he doesn't give a, right now, he doesn't really care about the consequences of what he's doing. I think when K2 moves out of the sign towards the end of this week, he'll start caring about the consequences. Okay. But I'm not expecting anything like an overthrow of Putin. I'm not expecting anything like some kind of miracle coming along and saving Zelensky. And I think one of the things that is important to remember, so again, not excusing the invasion. That was a stupid thing. It was a stupid, cruel thing to do. It was, I think it was done out of panic or maybe cold calculation, combination of both. And I also think that the United States has not been an honest player in this. And the reason I say that is because Ukraine was being encouraged to join NATO by the United States, and that was really the only excuse that Putin needed to invade. I'm not saying he wouldn't have found another excuse, but that was the only excuse he needed to invade. So again, it's not justifying what he's done at all under any circumstances. That's not what this is about. But these decisions don't occur in a vacuum. So there was no vacuum that existed in Russia in terms of wanting these territories back or liberated. But there was also a certain amount of stupidity indicated on the part of the United States. Again, that's not justifying what happened. Okay, so I just want to be really, really clear about that. Okay. All right. So let's look at other parts of the world other than the Ukraine, because we have. Let me just see now. So we have the moon in the 12th house since I started this particular uh, lecture, and that does indicate changes in governments. Okay, so the moon or loss of governments. So essentially, Saturn, Mars, Venus, so forcibly changing your government. Saturn, Mars, and Venus aspecting the 7th house. Second house has to do with the sun, and that's again disruptions of governments. Also, secret behind the scenes deals going on between different governments right now. Okay. Fifth house, and we're only looking for the major planets. Fifth house has K2 in it. This will be so essentially K2 just is just about to change signs within a couple of days. And so you'll see disruption, I would say on a broad scale, in terms of energy prices, food prices. That's the big story that doesn't seem to be getting a lot of attention right now. In some ways, Ukraine has blown every other story off the map, but there are food riots going on in different parts of the world, even as we speak. And those will get more active. You'll see a lot of smaller governments challenged, maybe hold on to power for another year, but challenged and perhaps fail. The other condition we have in the chart is we have Saturn, Mars, and Venus in the 7th house, aspect in the 1st house. So this indicates a desire for perfectionism and protection in partnerships. So China will be expected to back Russia no matter what. Germany, England, all the NATO countries will be expected to back the United States no matter what. And that's what worries me. The worry is more based around the idea that there's going to be a certain rigidity for at least 2 months in negotiations. And that's because of the Mars-Saturn conjunction. So Ukraine has signaled it's willing to concede on one point, but the other points not yet. Jupiter, and again, I think this also gives an indication that governments will act dictatorially, either through direct government shutdowns or through what I would call organized meritocracy. And what I mean by that is essentially you'll have governments which are ostensibly democratic, but who will use experts to impose order. So the benefit of the latter is you can always vote those people out of office, but it takes a while to do so. And I think that's what's happening in a lot of the democracies right now. You have a bunch of not autocrats, but technocrats essentially deciding policy, which is actually what we hire them to do. That's their strength. But I'm just trying to think of a good way to put this so people won't get irritated at me. Technocrats aren't perfect. They're not all seeing. They're experts, but they're not all seeing. They're not all knowing. And there's a harm in accepting everything they say without question. And that doesn't happen. Also, I think one of the things that's happening right now is the media is getting very righteous or very, with Mercury and Aquarius, it's getting very righteous or very full of itself in terms of, in terms of feeling its own moral force. However, and this is already starting, you'll see a lot of media scandals popping up around the world. And there are definitely media trials. Those have existed for a few years, but there'll be a lot of embarrassments to the media, especially within about 2 to 3 months, and a lot of scandals. The other thing is this Sun-Jupiter conjunction. Mercury is very far away from the sun, so that's actually a good thing. Mercury's position, so it'll help people. But that clarity of thought, that clarity of vision, and keep in mind, I'm not coming out on either the right or the left media outlets. I was a journalism major. I look skeptically at both sides. And it's mainly because I've seen both sides act with less than the best interest of the public at heart. So this doesn't mean we don't have a good press in this country. We actually have really dedicated people. But we do have a biased press. And every country has a biased press. There's an impossibility in separating a person's opinions from what they're seeing. So everybody has their own truth. Everybody isn't entitled to their own facts, but everybody is entitled to their own truth. So facts are what happened, okay? Truth is what you experience. And so facts do not equal truth. Facts equal facts. Facts are a series of events that happen. Truth is determined by how you interpret those facts. So that's really, so people can feel free to disagree with me on that, but that's how I see it. And Rahu is in Taurus. There'll be scandals in the money markets, and there'll be scandals with leaderships over the next few months. Also, keep something in mind. Mars aspecting Rahu will make leaders impulsive. They'll take big steps to achieve their goals. They'll lose patience. So just be aware of your duty as a citizen to essentially say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want this to happen, or hey, or hey, I want to give you some input on this. We have that ability. Okay, now I'm going to go to the world map. I've gone on too long. Okay, so potential hotspots are in Western Canada, Southern California, Arizona, media scandals in the middle of the country. And luckily there is no Rahu line running across the United States, so we're going to be free from panic, at least for a little while. Sun and Jupiter coming together in this combination indicate some repressive government means in this part of the world. Moon is going through close to Washington, D.C. There'll be some change in governments or some change in policies, and the same is true in Brazil and Guinea up here. The other parts where you might see conflicts are on the tip of Brazil, and you'll see some panic or some alarm on the Azores. You'll also see, let me get this out of the way, you'll also see some changes in government and some emphasis on money in the UK and Ireland and in Spain and Portugal and in Northwest Africa, all the way down to Gabon, and also France. France will be kind of repressive over the next few months. The moon is over here in Western Europe. There's a moon line running right through Turkey. That to me does not indicate an earthquake, but it indicates a change in government. So there'll be some governmental changes and maybe some losses to the economy of Turkey. The other lines that are prominent are Venus and Mars, quote unquote, close to the Ukraine border, and Rahu. So there'll be some panic in Russia, maybe more protests, definitely, more resistance to the government. Mercury will be crossing over Rahu, and that'll be hitting China and India. So you're going to have to be careful about that part of the world panicking under economic pressure, and again, repressive governments in China and down through Southeast Asia. And finally, the moon goes over Japan, so the Japanese economy will probably take a hit because of this. Philippines will, and Mars and Venus, they'll be fighting in New Guinea. I'm sorry, that was Guyana over here. My apologies. That was Guyana over here in New Guinea and Australia, and some repressive moves in government in Australia because of panic. The inflationary pressure will probably continue for a while. And even the United States government is saying towards the end of the year. So I think those are the kinds of things that you have to watch out for. But I'm also expecting there to be some problems out with the government. So right now, a lot of people are behind the United States government, but if fuel prices continue to rise, that patience will run out pretty quickly. So, and that'll be true in Europe too. Now let's quickly go through the astrological signs. My apologies, I rambled on a bit too much about other things. Okay, so Ketu is going to be entering. I'm sorry, Rahu is going to be entering Aries, so that will make Aries much more impatient with work success, good for financial gains, extraordinarily perfectionistic, and very irritated with relationship partners. Taurus has finally freed itself from the yoke of Rahu, and Scorpio's um, freed itself from Ketu, but that'll give some problems in relationship life for Taurus, and but also it'll make that sign much more greedy, much more self-interested. Gemini has the combustion of Jupiter by the sun will end. Communications will open up in relationships, but still relationship life looks like within about 2 months it'll be tough again for the sign. For the moon is, I'm sorry, for Cancer, the moon is in the 12th house. That'll make the sign less confident. There'll be pressure from spouse and relationship partner, pressure from children. Children will seem to be strange. And also the sign will have some bad luck, but some success in career and financial matters. Leo has Jupiter and Sun and Mercury in the 7th house. So much more chance for business partnerships, much more accelerated growth. And I think overall, K2 goes to the 3rd house. It'll make it more courageous. Again, it'll still have to watch out for illnesses, but good opportunities for fame and reputation. For Virgo, Virgo has no planets in the 7th house, but Venus, Mars, and Saturn are in the 5th house. That's a good combination for this particular sign. And K2 goes to the 2nd house. So again, people will not understand the sign as well, but at least it won't have the problem of having Rahu in the 9th house, where bosses or supervisors seem difficult to understand. And also career life will rise for the sign this month. For Libra, Libra has 3 planets in the 5th house. All 3 of them good for money. So it indicates luck with money. Mars, Saturn, and Venus. Domestic life and educational life will take center stage for the sign. This sign also has potential of love affairs, but that's really not until Venus goes into Aries. And I wouldn't encourage it for the sign if we were married. It could prove really disastrous as Mars aspects the 7th house, and it could lose everything. Rahu's in the 7th house for Libra, so there'll be a lot of patience. There'll be a lot of temptation to end long-term relationships. But career life looks okay. It looks like they'll be fine. For Scorpio, Scorpio has Mars with Saturn in the 3rd house, so there's strong perfectionist tendencies. Jupiter, Sun, and Mercury are in the 4th house, so it looks like good luck for this particular sign. And excuse my face, and especially at home. And we have no planets in the 7th house for the first time, although there will still be a little bit of drag because Saturn and Mars are in this particular sign right now. So that'll make relationship life seem a little boring, a little dull. And let me see now. Moon is in the 8th house, so they'll be interested in occultism or investigation. For Sagittarius, Sagittarius has Mars, Venus, and Saturn. Mars, Venus, and Saturn in the 2nd house, excuse me. Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury in the 3rd house. So it will give it increased interest in promoting itself and in learning more and talking more. Rahu's in the 6th, so there can be panic about illnesses. Moon is in the 7th house. That's actually not a bad placement for gain through spouse or relationship partner, and even gain a relationship partner. So opportunities for romantic life are strong for Sagittarius this week. For Capricorn, there's still this kind of dictatorial perfectionist combination in Capricorn. So there's a certain rigidity or a certain steadiness of position that'll fade out in a couple of months, but it'll do a lot of damage before that's done. But it will make this sign very easy to assume control or command. Jupiter, Sun, and Mercury are in the second house, so good financial gains. Rahu's in the fourth house, so some difficulties in home life. Moon is in the sixth house, so again, some worries about illnesses. And K2's in the 11th house, so don't trust your friends. For Aquarius, we're coming up on the home stretch now. For Aquarius, Jupiter, Sun, and Mercury in the first house actually has a good combination for financial success and financial gains, especially through partnerships. But we do have a lot of planets in the 12th house in particular, so we're really not going to see fruition of that kind of luck until really April 1st or so. And that Saturn in the 12th house, it'll still give heavy expenditures connected with small animals and with home. Rahu's in the third house, so this sign will gain more courage, more determination. And K2's in the ninth house, so it'll give difficult to please or unpredictable bosses, or maybe loss of a boss, but more career recognition. Finally, Pisces ruler is Jupiter, is in the 12th house, along with the Sun, so it'll give a loss of enemies, a loss of problems, but it'll also give expenses connected with home. Rahu sits in the second house, so this time it's time for Pisces to be dissatisfied with the amount of money and wanting to change its residence. And K2 sits in the 8th house, so that will give some health issues to relationship partners, and maybe some losses to them. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a health issue. And Saturn sits in the 11th house with Venus, Mars, and Saturn, which is a wealth-producing combinations. So it should give good influxes of money. And Jupiter and Sun are in the 12th house, indicating more interest in spiritual life. So that's it for this week. I want to wish you all the best of luck in the world, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye, and I love you all. Namaste.